Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be focusing on the different question styles available to you within Snap XMP. As well as taking you through the different question types and styles available, I'm going to look at some ideas of why different question styles might be used and aim to give you some advice on how to keep your respondents engaged throughout the survey with the aim of reducing the number of people who drop out partway through. Plus, I've got a couple of brand new features to show you, which are based around transitioning between pages and some After Effects used to make it even more obvious when a checkbox is selected. When thinking about your questionnaires and forms, there's of course a lot of things to take into consideration. What are you trying to find out and why? This is probably the most obvious question, but equally often the least asked question when creating a questionnaire. Take a step back and ask yourself what data you might be getting from a question and what you might be able to do with it. If the answer is, I'm not sure, the simple response is remove it from the questionnaire. This is something which, as survey experts, I don't think we do often enough. So question the person who's asking you to create the questionnaire. If not, the danger is that we end up with a huge questionnaire which probably doesn't flow and, more importantly, actually isn't used for anything after the event. How long should the survey be and how will it be completed? These are both very much intertwined. If someone is completing a questionnaire on their phone, which realistically accounts for a very large proportion of most surveys, especially if your questionnaire has been emailed or texted to them, it's quite likely that you've just interrupted them. So you need to get the information from them as quickly and concisely as you can. In previous webinars, we've discussed using routing and masking to assist with this. We've also got the option to hide certain nice-to-know questions if they're being viewed on a smartphone or in a scenario when you know time is of the essence. Who's your audience? It's vital to consider your terminology and the language used throughout your surveys. Would images and image-led interactive questions help, or in some circumstances perhaps hinder the respondent? And finally, how might the respondent benefit? Consider the reason behind why a respondent might feel inclined to complete the questionnaire. If there isn't much perceived benefit to them, then you're already up against a losing battle. This is where keeping them engaged is more important than ever. So let's head into the software and look at how you might make use of the different question styles on offer. The format of today will be me working my way through a live questionnaire which has got lots of different question styles. Some of them I will take you into the survey within Snap itself and show you how the questionnaire or how the question is set up, and we'll discuss a few benefits or perhaps things to be aware of. I'll be showing you the questionnaire in Snap XMP desktop and sometimes also within Snap XMP online, as occasionally the way a question is set up or features added will differ between the two different platforms. But most of the time I'll be pointing you to the live questionnaire and just taking you through what's actually happening. So initially we're going to look at a preview within Snap XMP online. So I'll take you into a questionnaire I've already set up. We're going to the Collect tab. And I'm just going to run a live preview. Now this survey is available to view on our website, by the way, and I'll be giving you a link to that at the end of today's session. It is a long and comprehensive example of the different question styles available in Snap, and also includes an extensive display of functionality throughout and in particular towards the end. For this reason, you can jump straight to a particular question or section, jumping back to the beginning whenever you like. So I'll jump onto carousels, for example. I can look at the way the different carousels work. I can then start right back at the beginning and perhaps look at a different feature. Today though, we're going to be working our way from sort of beginning to end and looking at the different sections as we go along. So go ahead and press next. Now I'm actually going to skip over the first couple of pages because they're just based on the different note variables, and also gives a bit of information about the text-only version, the link at the top of the page. So we won't worry about those ones today. So we'll move straight on to the date question to begin with. In terms of accessibility, I should add that often when we're looking at some of the more exciting question types, I often get asked about the accessibility and the fact that they can't use these types of questions because of accessibility and they work for X, Y, and Z. to a certain extent, that is true. Certain question styles aren't going to be accessible, particularly those that are fully dependent on the sort of image being viewed, as they're just not going to work in certain situations. So that's why all of our surveys, or certainly the ones which are built using the template supplied with Snap, will have this text-only version of the survey. And that will be the first thing that gets read out to someone that's using an accessible reader. And that will effectively turn the survey into a version which is more suitable for that reader. So if I give a quick example, if I go back to the beginning and look at the map controls. So here I can click part of an image, but if I was to click on the text-only link at the top, you can see all the images are stripped out, including the progress bar at the bottom, etc. But we're now just faced with a standardized question. And the same applies if I go back into the full image version, go back to the beginning, and perhaps look at a simple sort of grid or matrix type question. So a text reader would find it easier reading it in a format where the questions are broken out into individual sort of sections rather than grouped together. So yeah, going back to my original point, you can look at including all these different types of questions that we're going to look at today, just making sure that you have got that full image version at the top. But I'll jump back to the date. And these are just sort of standard questions, which by default will use the native device control. So if I'm looking at this on an iPhone, then I will get the Apple calendar. If I'm looking at a Samsung phone, then I will get the Samsung sort of calendar. So you're basically going to be getting whatever type of calendar or clock, if I move on to the next page, that you're looking for. Likewise, this is the Edge calendar as opposed to the Chrome calendar. So nothing particularly exciting, but basically just to make sure that the surveys are kind of as people expect them. They're not having to sort of use calendar, which they're just sort of not familiar with. Now, moving down to, I'll move beyond the sort of single choice and multi-choice questions, apart from to say that we're making use here of alphabet, so putting it in alphabetical order, and also making use of things like none of the above. And on a larger question, a drop-down menu is quite useful, and that's particularly where having it alphabetical is very useful, but making sure that things like other or none of the above remain at the bottom. Now for grid questions, if you've got a series of questions relating to the same sub-questions, then this is where a compound grid can be useful. So in today's example, I'm using 2 grid questions, but we're asking questions about the content in terms of importance and satisfaction. So and say for the course content, I thought it was perhaps very important or extremely important, but actually I wasn't very satisfied. So it just saves the participant having to read course content kind of twice. Now today I've just got sort of 2 questions. It may be that you've got multiple questions. So perhaps you might have importance, satisfaction, and then you might combine that with an open sort of comments question, or maybe importance, satisfaction, and then spend question, etc. Now I'm going to quickly pop back into the software to show you how this one's set up. If I come down to the grid questions, and I said they're standard grid questions. They're like styles just because I've been fiddling a little bit with the background colors, but ultimately we're making use of columns and compound, and then also under compound we can specify that I've specified that the second section is going to take up 40% of the space, whilst the first one is going to take up 60%, as opposed to making use of auto, so Snap will just attempt to work it out itself. Now, if I just pop back into Snap Online, as I said, sometimes you set things up in slightly different ways in the online versus the desktop software. So if I go into the Build tab, so for Snap Online, the Build tab, we go into More. Now this is actually already turned on at the moment, so if I effectively turn it off and then could turn it back on again. So it's just done via the more rather than using the compound option within desktop. Now moving back into my live example, we've got some open-ended questions, and here I've added a character count. So you can see as I'm typing, the characters at the bottom are reversing. So I've set a limit of 2,000 characters. Obviously, as I hit the 2,000 characters, it will physically stop me from typing, but it's also giving me a countdown timer as we start typing away. Looking at the next question, here I'm making use of a couple of options. I've got a postcode pattern, or zip code if you're listening in from across the pond, but I've also added what we call placeholder text just to give some indication of what type of information should be put there. So if I start typing in a zip code, but perhaps, or postcode, and start making some mistakes, when I try and move on, it tells me I've entered an invalid UK postcode. So there's different patterns available. But if I put the correct one in, it lets me carry on. As I said, having that placeholder text to begin with just gives an example of what sort of information we're looking for. Here we've got some validation and calculations for a series of questions. So if I type the number 2, you can see it's adding up some figures as you go along. I've also got a pattern in there which allows me to write the word 3 as opposed to the number 3. And we click next. I'm going to move on to the next question. Actually, here we've got an example of some inline questions, so new question style. So again, it just allows the participant to keep the focus of where they are. If I go back to the previous example, they might have to tick other, and then they're having to sort of look further below, by which time they may have already looked at the next button. Particularly if I was ticking cost and I wanted to know what the cost was, it's not going to be the last thing that they've just clicked. They've sort of looked at cost and then maybe looked all the way down here, and then they've got to look over there. Whilst in this example, if I just reset that page, as they're going down, they can add the information straight away. Our drag and drop question styles are both engaging, and if you combine it with the next one, so this one's called categorize, but if we combine it with ranking, it also enables the participant to, well, doesn't allow the participant to make mistakes. So first of all, I cannot choose 4 options. Equally, I cannot choose more than 1 as being my first option, etc. Alternatively, if you don't wish to use the drag and drop styles, then we can actually make use of the ratings check, which is doing the same thing, just not in quite a sort of visual way. So I can say that course content was the first. If I try and say that user guide was the second, but then forget that I've already said something was the first and say that location was the first, you can see it stops me straight away. Now, again, I'll just quickly pop into desktop to show you that one. First of all, you can see, come down to the drag and drop questions. They're actually just making use of the drag and drop style questions. So drag categorize first. There's drag rank next, and and drag rank next. But if we come down to the ratings check, let's say standard grid question, but if I right click and go into variable properties, it's just making use of rating check. And within the variable properties is where a lot of the other things that I've been talking about today. So there's sort of the ordering, or we talked about ordering it either alphabetically or randomly, etc., etc. Now again, if I just pop back into Snap Online and come down to that ratings check question, that it is quite a long questionnaire because it's pretty much covering everything we can do in Snap. To specify the ratings check, we do that under validation and masking. And again, that's where a lot of the functionality that I've been talking about today is stored. Now, the next example, if I just reset that one, this is really useful when you've got a larger amount of question text to read. So again, if I just reset that page, so I've got lots and lots of different sub-questions, essentially sort of statements, and I'm asking people to sort of agree or disagree with these statements. Okay. Now, again, if we look at that question in Snap, look at desktop to begin with, you can see as a sort of standard grid layout, it does work to a certain extent, but there's quite a lot of text going on. Obviously, if you're expecting someone to view this on a mobile phone, then the screen's going to be a lot smaller. To be honest, a standard grid would automatically convert to a drop-down options, but again, drop-downs with lots and lots of text don't really work that well either. So setting this up as a carousel works really well on a mobile phone and even on smaller browsers as well. Looking at the next question. So we've got some attach it functions, so we can attach different files. So we've got files, we can attach audio, photos and signatures. So this is a sort of just normal online survey, so I can upload a different file. So anything from a sort of a PDF, a Word document, an Excel file, anything you like really. If this was using our offline interviewer app, then actually it would automatically open up the camera functionality on the device or the microphone, or it would open up the sort of recording signature sort of app on the phone. So rather than having to sort of take a photo and then upload it, it would kind of do it all in one go. Moving on to our image-led questions and styles. Now these are a great way of bringing your questionnaires and forms to life. They can add an element of sort of gamification to the questionnaire, particularly if we look at the sliders. It just makes it a bit more interesting when you're filling it out. But they can also be a really useful aid to the respondent, helping them to understand what the different options mean and prompting them if they've perhaps forgotten what happened or what something was, or in this case, forgotten who their trainer was. Maybe they've forgotten the person's name, but they remember what they look like. And remember, because we have that text-only option at the top, if someone is using a narrating system and they wanted to use the text-only version, then they can always move to that version instead. Now, again, just looking back at desktop for these ones. So these are initially just single choice questions. Could be multiple choice questions, but they are shown as either map controls or slider controls. Now, in terms of map controls, we do supply you with a number of different sort of templates and template map controls that you want. But the idea and the beauty of this is that you can upload any kind of image you want and then just draw around the hotspots. So if I double click on this one, so I've just uploaded my own image and then I've drawn around using, in this case, using circles, but you can draw any kind of shape you want and just specifying that this person is Harriet, that person is Alex. So moving back to the live questionnaire. Now, the rest of this survey is more about highlighting some additional features that can be added to your questions. I'm not going to go into sort of how these are all set up because I have covered most of them in sort of recent webinars, which I'll point you to at the end of today. But I will progress through the survey just to kind of highlight how some of these might be used or things for you to consider. So masking is a useful way of sort of filtering down a list of options which perhaps are no longer relevant. So in my case today, I've chosen 3 options here. I'm now asking which of those was the most enjoyable. Also making use of none of the above as we selected earlier. And also this one has auto answering. So if I only select that I went on the Access course, then I'm not being asked which is my favorite course because clearly the only course I went on was Access. But in the background, when we come back to analysis, it will actually have analysis as being the favorite course. With static masking, this is a way of removing specific answers within a question. So in this example, I've removed the NA or the not applicable for the training room because I know that everyone was in the training room. They may not have gone to the break room and they may not have had anything from catering, but they definitely made use of the training room. Now, another scenario might be sub-questions which are perhaps food types or food options that you can buy, and perhaps these are different sizes. So it might be some of these food types are not available in some of these sizes. So again, it's just a way of removing options which aren't relevant whilst maintaining the original sort of grid layout. Another use of sort of static masking in projects that I've run over the years might be where you're running courses. If I just go back to my previous question, let's pretend I've got this list of sort of 5 or 6, it's probably more like 8 different courses that have been running for a number of years, but let's pretend next year we're no longer going to run the publisher course. So it's tempting just to delete that answer code from the original questionnaire, but by deleting that answer code, you're going to be deleting all the old data with it. So much better to mask out or hide the publisher course from the live survey, but it will still remain in the background with all that old data. And on a similar note, this is useful if you've got sort of routing in your questionnaire, which is pointing off to certain positions, or anyone that's got some complex smart reporting projects set up, which again is referencing certain positions, because in Snap we don't talk about the words, we talk about position 1, position 2, position 3, etc. If we start removing some of these, what was perhaps position 7 suddenly becomes 6. We've already talked a little bit about exclusive, min-max, validation, and placeholder text. So we'll move beyond those ones. But if we move on to this one, we've got a nice little example where I'm making use of some clever routing. So I'm asking people to choose somewhere between 1 and 3 words. So if I choose 3 of these words, then great, I can move on. If on the other hand, I choose 2 options and something else, I'm asked to put a word in. If I just reset that page and perhaps I choose engaging and then something else, I can put joy in. And then as I choose 1, because I'm allowed 3 in total, it's allowing me to do 1 more. Obviously, because I've already got 1 chosen here, what I can't do is choose a third one now. Here I've got a timer that's been added to the page, so you can see it's slowly counting down 1 minute 50, which can either limit how long you remain on that page or how long you have to remain on that page, or it can force you to jump over onto the next page once that time's finished. Now this might seem like an odd thing that you might want to do, but to give a real life scenario, I run a children's football club, and as part of that, every few years I have to take an online course, which involves me watching very mundane videos, followed by some very obvious questions such as, was it okay to swear at that player? Is it okay to kick someone? Now, having run a football club for 15 years, and even if I hadn't, I can pretty much answer every single question in about 3 minutes without watching any of the videos at all. Now, often that's what I do. I just answer the questions and don't watch the videos because, yeah, I don't want to waste my time. But really what the software should be doing is making sure that I can't skip over onto the next questions until such time that I've at least pretended to watch the videos. Now, I should say that if the FA is listening in, of course, I did make that example up completely just to give you a good example. But back to my example. Here I've got, I said, actually a bit of a test asking how do we do a page break. So I can choose maybe Control Enter. Here unfortunately that's not the right answer. Or Control Shift B. I do get the right answer. Text substitution. This is a good way of making the survey more personal and relevant to the respondent. And when combined with masking, this can be used to really focus the attention. If you've got a database of known information in the background, you can really personalize the information for the respondent, seeded in products that they perhaps might have bought, or the department that they've worked in, perhaps dates of a previous appointment, etc. So in this example today, what were the reasons that we booked? So if I take course and content, so you can see I've got masking below, but I'm going to choose another option. And in there, I'm going to type some information. So friend was going. Now, you might consider putting a page break here, but again, just for sort of demonstration purposes, quite useful to see it happening on page. But yes, I've got some text substitution taking the data from this please specify and putting it into the answer set of the question below. And again, it's the masking which is specifying whether or not that displays. Derived variables are a great tool which tend to mainly get used during analysis to simplify the data. So perhaps combining a number of different age groups into maybe sort of an under 40 category. But they can also be used to perform calculations which then can be used to determine which statements or which follow-on questions are shown. So in my example today, let's say again, I can type the word to, and you can see I've got additional questions, and I type in 3 there. So based on that, I've got some text substitution going on. I've also got a derived variable calculating these 2 figures, and another derived variable working out what percentage discount I might get. Whilst if I perhaps say 10, you can see now I've got a total of 12, my discount goes up to 40%. What we could also do is follow that on with, if they give information, a follow-up email could be sent to them. So that's actually an alert, which is my next example, or an example in just a moment, should I say. Now, just a couple more to go. Earlier, I gave an example of something called initial value to add up a couple of options. This time it's taking it a step further, and based upon a calculation, it's going to pre-answer some future questions. So this is asking about how many training courses I've attended, and this is all in relation to something called CPD, or continual professional development. Now at the moment I haven't attended any courses over the last 2 years, so actually I've not met my requirements. If I say that I've been to 1 course this year, still not met my requirements. If I say that I went to 2 the last year, still not met. But let's pretend I've now done 5 in total. So 5, it's auto answered the follow-on question. Now, in this example, I've allowed the person to then say, well, actually, yes, I have met that requirement, but actually I'm going to override that and say that I'd like to continue with my training. So it may well be that this is answering a hidden question, so the respondent can't see it and it's just available ready for your analysis. Or it could be that it's displaying some data or which they cannot change. Or, as I said in this example, I've allowed them to override that information. So just do that one again. So it's currently on, I've not met my requirements. As soon as I put in a figure which is going to trigger a positive response. So I briefly mentioned an alert a moment ago. So an alert is an automated email sent to a specific email address when the survey is submitted. So it can be set up to send a message to multiple people. So again, I'm just going to trigger some questions here. So if I say I've got 2 and 9. So I've got 11 people, 40%. Would I be interested in some more information? So if I say yes, as I said, I can type my email address in there. I could type a number of different email addresses in there, and an email could be sent off to different people. It could also be sent back to you, as in the survey designer. And the idea here is that you don't have to wait till all your data is sort of submitted, as in the entire survey project is closed, and then you start looking through your data and realize you have issues. Any information gets triggered and sent off to the relevant person the moment the person presses submit. So as I said, it could be an email going back to the respondent to say, here's the information you're interested in. It could also equally be an email going back to the survey designer saying, this person's had a very poor experience, please get in contact with them. As I said, it's all about making sure that you don't have to trawl through the data after the event. Here we've got some media, so adding media into your questionnaire. So I've turned off the volume so you won't be able to hear this, but adding media into your questionnaire can be a great way of getting a lot of information across without the need for reading an essay. It can also be an important tool when working with younger children, people with learning difficulties, or perhaps just where the respondent isn't using their mother tongue. We've also got a sound clip in there, but again, I won't play that because you won't be able to hear it. And then finally, this survey's been set up to direct the respondent off to different locations based on how they complete the survey. So if I press submit today, having clicked the support hub page, when I press next and submit, you'll see it takes me off to the support hub page. And just whilst I'm on this page, it's a good opportunity just for me to sort of point out that we do have a resources section. And within there, there's lots of our old sort of webinars that we've been doing over the last couple of years, plus a number of different videos. There's more specific information about Snap XMP Online or the desktop software or the offline interviewer software. Or if you're not sure where to find what you're looking for, there's a general search at the top as well. But let's just look back at the software of how we set up different locations when we press submit. So if I come down to my questionnaire at the bottom, it was question number 45. You can see down the bottom question number 45. And if I go into my variables, so my list of questions, and I have a derived variable at the bottom called target. So let's double click on that one. And I just click on toggle definitions. So this target variable is pointing off to question number 45. And if they choose option number 1, it's going to send them off to the standard thank you page. If they choose option number 2, it will send them off to the Snap Surveys website, etc., etc. So you could send them off to many, well, up to 2,000 different locations if you really wanted to. And this name of this derived variable is target. If I go back into the design window and into questionnaire properties, you can see under submit, rather than putting the default website or default thank you message or just a standard website, what we're actually doing is putting the name of that derived variable and popping it in brackets. So, but just notice that's the extra sort of curly brackets or the extra wiggly brackets, if you like. And if you're running surveys in multiple languages, this would be a really important feature to make use of to make sure that respondents get sent back to a thank you page or follow-on page, which is in the same language as the survey or form that they've just completed. So in that case, you would be making use of a power data variable. I don't think there's one set up in here, but there's a power data variable in a multilingual survey called id.language, and you'd be making use of whichever language that they're using and send them off to the relevant thank you page. A more elaborate example would be sending them off to a follow-on survey, but at the same time perhaps seeding data from that first survey into the next survey. Now, to finish off, just a quick sneak peek of a couple of features have just been released and 2 which are just around the corner. These are all based around transitions. So whether that's transitioning between pages or transition effects when a checkbox is selected. So I've got a couple of live surveys which I'm going to demonstrate this one on. So, some links at the top. Now, before I start, just to sort of highlight the fact that when you view this today, which we're viewing this over Teams, it will look a little bit jumpy, and that's just the way that sort of Teams shares things, unfortunately. But rest assured, if I wasn't sharing this over as sort of a Teams call, then it would be smoothly transitioning between the pages. But this first example is actually using 2 features. One which will slide horizontally across the page. So if I select an answer, it's sliding across the page. And it's also making use of auto next. So rather than me having to press next, when I select one of these, it's just automatically moving on to that next page. Now, I said it will be a little bit jumpy when you're viewing this today. I said it's actually viewing perfectly fine at my end. This is a multiple choice question, so this time it won't jump onto the next page until I actually physically press next. Okay, so it's only on single response questions because Snap doesn't know when you've finished answering this question. Okay. Now, if we look at this next one, and this one is doing pretty much exactly the same, but this time it's going to move vertically up the page. Now, this works really well on sort of smaller devices and mobile devices, so I'm just going to make this look a little bit more like a mobile device. So making this look a bit like a Galaxy phone. So as I select, you can see this time it's scrolling up the page as opposed to scrolling horizontally. So those two, or in fact those three features, the slide transitions and also the auto next functionality, they're actually available right now. The next two are going to be out very, very soon, and these are based around transitions of what happens when you kind of select an option. So I've got another option here. This is what we call a ripple effect, so it's effectively sort of just highlighting where my cursor is more than anything else, but it's when I select an actual option. Now, this is very similar to something you can do actually on a normal sort of PC or laptop or Mac. Basically, it's really just sort of specifying what happens when you click on the cursor. So I know it's something I turned on a while on my dad's laptop a few years back because he couldn't work out where on the screen his mouse was and where he's clicking, to be honest. So yeah, more than anything else, it's just a way of sort of highlighting what they clicked. Now, a similar example. So this time the box is going to temporarily enlarge. So similar sort of thing. In fact, if I go back, this one actually works quite well when you combine it with show as buttons. So again, we've got a few different transitions going on here. The buttons are actually changing. I've got the tick, but also it's getting bigger and smaller. So yeah, clearly none of these sort of last little features are going to set the world on fire, but they're nice little tools that can assist you with engagement, accessibility, and ultimately usability. So keep an eye out for our newsletters, social media, and Support Hub for more information on how these are added and when they're going to be released. But as I said, we're talking about the next sort of week or so. Okay, so hopefully that's introduced you to a few question styles or a few new question styles and possibly some nice features that you can make use of. Making the effort to create an engaging survey that's seamless to complete obviously is going to take you a little bit more time and thought, but it really will help you to avoid the frustration on part of the participants and will hopefully lead to getting more surveys fully completed and of course reducing the number of inevitable dropouts. On screen now are a few QR codes. The one on the left will direct you to a page on our website which covers the different question styles that I've been talking about today. And at the bottom of that page, there's a link to the survey which I was using today. The two middle ones will take you to a couple of previous webinars on adding the dynamic content that I was showing you towards the end. And they spend a little bit more time actually showing you how to do that within Snap itself, as I appreciate today, a lot of the time I've just been showing you the sort of output or the end result. And if you have got a spare 2 minutes, then I'd be grateful if you wouldn't mind completing the short survey, which can be accessed via the QR code on the right. Should just take you a minute or so and is always very useful. Thank you for joining me and we will hopefully see you again soon.